All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today at this Open Source ICT Solutions Zabbix webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about the Zabbix API communication today and learn all about using that Zabbix API for our own benefit. A few notes. Microphones will be muted today. If you have any questions, simply ask them in the Q&A. If you have any issues, you can always use the chat. All right, without further ado, let's get started on that Zabbix API. So, my name is Nathan Liefting. I work for Open Source ICT Solutions as a Zabbix trainer and IT consultant. And basically what we do is 40 hours a week, Zabbix, and more Zabbix. So that's our focus, that's our core business. And that's basically all we do. So building integrations, building new implementations, templates, anything that you might need to work with Zabbix, that's what we do. We're based out of the Netherlands as a Zabbix premium partner. We also have subsidiaries in the United Kingdom and the United States, so we can basically serve you all over the world. So let's talk a little bit about that Zabbix API. What is it? Well, if you're working with Zabbix, and probably since you are here in a Zabbix API course, you are working with Zabbix, you probably already know that sometimes you need to do a little bit more than what Zabbix allows. Although Zabbix comes with a lot of features, of course, every product is limited by whatever the developers want to put into the product. And sometimes you want to extend the product Zabbix beyond its capabilities. And the Zabbix API is perfect for that. So what can we do with that Zabbix API? Well, for example, we can make sure that we automatically register new hosts, not only, of course, using the built-in functionalities like network discovery and host auto-registration, but we can also use the API. We can find hosts in Zabbix based on any search strings. We can reassign hosts from a proxy to another proxy. And that's actually how we have already built our own implementations to do load balancing between proxies, which isn't officially supported. It's an implementation we built ourselves. We can import and export data from Zabbix using templates, actions, all of those we can import and export them. Maintenance can actually be added and removed using the API as well. We can acknowledge or close specific problems, get values from the history as we see them in the database. It's not recommended to do actual database queries for things like that, but always to use the API. Search, operate users, user groups, and we can even create our own customized reporting from the API. And of course, that's not all. That's just some examples of how we could utilize that API to start building things. So the Zabbix API is part of the Zabbix web server. It's a way that we can use to extend Zabbix beyond its current feature set and capabilities, or add it into our own applications that we use within our organizations. As such, it is shipped as part of the Zabbix web server frontend to allow you to actually start integrating it with other things. Zabbix is always trying to focus on this open and customizability, and having a good and solid working API is a big part of that. The communication with the API is completely done in JSON RPC 2.0. So it's a JSON format remote procedure call. The URL can always be found at whatever our Zabbix URL is, /Zabbix most of the times, and then /API JSON RPC.php. And on Nginx, you might find that Zabbix is actually not present. And then the format will look a little bit like this. So we have our JSON call, the data that we're sending to that API. And it's formatted in JSON. And then we have to select a method. There's a bunch of methods. We'll talk about those later as well. But in this case, we're using the host.get method that Zabbix made available to us to get host information. At the parameters, we can specify things like output and filters that we would like to see. And we also have to supply an authentication token and the ID of the user on which we want to use the authentication token on. So once we start doing these calls, what's important? Well, the Zabbix API is a part of the Zabbix frontend. And as such, it also follows the permission system that we are already familiar with within our Zabbix environment. So we have the user groups with the host group permissions on top of those. We have the users that we assign that user group to. And if we want to authenticate with the API, you will also have to set up an API user and set up permissions on that API user. So the permission system is still a big part of that API. Anything we do on that API will also be logged in the audit log. So you will still have an audit trail for that API user. Of course, HTTPS SSL is also supported, so we can connect securely. And we can do a lot of different calls. We were talking about those methods for a little bit. There's over 230. All of them can be found on the Zabbix documentation, and we can use them to do a bunch of stuff. Do keep in mind, in order to perform API calls, you will need to authenticate towards your Zabbix API, on which we have two options these days. Everything that's Zabbix 5.4 or earlier, so 5.0, 4.0, 3.0, will need to use the API method user.login. We will have to specify username and password to log into the API user and set it up like that. Starting from Zabbix 5.4, also in Zabbix 6.0 LTS that was just released, and anything from there comes with the user.login API method as well. But on top of that, we can also use API tokens, which is actually the preferred way of doing this, and make sure that we authenticate using API tokens, which we set up in the Zabbix frontend. So as it is the preferred method, it is also recommended to set it up this way. Simply go to Administration General API Tokens. That's where you want to do it most of the times, where anybody with super admin privileges can set up API tokens and manage all of them within our Zabbix environment. Additionally, you can also create API tokens for yourself in the user settings page. So you go to the user settings page to API tokens, and you can manage your own API tokens for the user you are logged in with. You will find a list of the API tokens currently available. You can click the new or create API token button, set up a name and what user it belongs to if we're doing it on Administration General, set up a description. We can set up an expiration date or make sure it never expires, and if it's enabled, yes or no. And then we can start using that API token to authenticate, as we did in that call over here. Simply specify the API token as the auth. So what if we don't want to use API tokens? We can use the user.login method. And the user.login method is just a way to log in to the Zabbix frontend using a username and password in the API. So for example, if we're using curl, we simply set up where we or how we want to connect using curl. In this case, we're gonna, of course, specify that it's JSON data we're sending with a post request. And in the post request, we'll specify in the JSON that we want to use the method user login and the parameters user with admin and password with the password Zabbix. So that's the default. As you can see, it is plain text in that curl command. Specify where you want to do it towards, and you will get a response in red as the token, the authentication token that we can use from here on out to log in as this user. That's definitely a little less secure than using the API tokens because we have that plain text username and password, but it's a possibility. And of course, we have Postman or similar API or HTTP request tools. We can use Postman to do our GET request or POST request as well. Specify where we want to do it to, username, password. It's the same thing, just we have to specify it in the body over here instead of in the CLI command. You will get the results and we can use the result in any other methods we want to use it. So let's say we want to get information from a host for a host from the Zabbix API. We can use curl, we can use any of our own scripting or programming languages. So we can do it in Python, we can do it in Bash, whatever you would like, but we can also do it on the CLI or with Postman, use a curl request. In this case, set up that we want to do JSON posts and specify the JSON RPC again. This time we use a different method, host.get, with a filter for the host Zabbix server. We specify the authentication token as we received it or as we configured it in the Zabbix frontend with the ID and where we want to send it to, which is of course that API URL. The response will then also be in a JSON format. In this case, we'll get the host ID and any of the other information, like is it enabled, is the status, what template is hooked up, what's the description for this host, etc. in the JSON response for the host Zabbix server as requested per the filters. So we can even specify more filters. For example, setting up an output filter. In this case, we'll do the same call with the same method, same authentication token towards the same target. But this time we add the output filter, where we specify that we only want the host ID and the status for the host Zabbix server. And then the result or the response from our API will look like this. We can see JSON RPC, result, host ID, and status, only giving us what we requested. So we can go a little bit further than just doing an API call and getting a list of all of our hosts. We can already filter any of the requested data using those filters and just requesting what we would like to see. Now, if you want to start using this, for example, to make some scripts or to start programming complete kind of applications using the Zabbix API, you are of course free to do so. There's no limitations there except for maybe the methods you could use, and you can start building your own libraries using functions or anything like that, using the methods and the calls. Alternatively, you could use existing libraries. Now, let me stress that the existing libraries for these calls aren't maintained by Zabbix themselves. These are community maintained libraries. We could, for example, use PyZabbix for a Python library that already comes with a bunch of Zabbix specific API calls. For example, over at github.com, Luke CK, we can find the PyZabbix. It's a solid library. It's well maintained, but of course, there's something to state for building your own libraries as well. All right, specify, in this case, in Python, how we want to import our libraries. So from PyZabbix, import Zabbix API. And then we no longer have to set up our own JSON RPC calls. We can simply use the method and fill out the information from the method that we want to use from the library with the information that we want to send towards the API. For example, in this case, we no longer have to set up the login method. We can simply use it from the library. You might also run into some error messages. Some typical RPC call error codes are listed over here. We could get a 32700 for invalid JSON. Make sure that you specify your JSON correctly. You might have typos, you might have used the wrong quotes or brackets, and then you will get a error code. 32600 received JSON isn't valid, so whatever you got back wasn't the correct response, and we have a bunch more of them. Make sure that you read your error codes well. And then, of course, there's always search engines, which you can use to find exactly what call codes you might be running into. A great part of using APIs, and not only Zabbix specific APIs, but any API that you might run into, you're gonna have to rely on the documentation. So simply go to zabbix.com/documentation/current/en for English, and you will find the Zabbix documentation. You can also go to zabbix.com and navigate to documentation from there. Find the menu titled API, and you will find an entire list of all the methods we can use: host create, host delete, host get, etc. Find the method you want to use simply by reading the names and seeing what you might want to do. And there's a complete explanation on how you can use the method and what you can actually do with that method. So the documentation is invaluable for building your own calls with the Zabbix API. And then it's important to start building your own flows. And what we mean by this is make sure that before you start building something with the API, you set an objective for yourself. What do I want to achieve by building an integration or anything like that using the Zabbix API? So in this case, we want to find all of the hosts in the host group called Linux servers. For all of those hosts in that host group Linux servers, we want to replace the value for the tag location with the value on-prem. And to the location, we want to add the value cloud instead of on-prem. So basically we do a search, find all the hosts in a specific host group, and a replace where we state location on-prem has to be replaced with location cloud. Using the API, we can simply do that. And then, of course, we can push that data back into Zabbix and make sure that it's updated. And that's just a small objective example. Of course, this could be whatever you would like to achieve. Now, we can get the group ID for the host group Linux servers as follows. We simply use the method hostgroup.get. We specify any filters. And like we said, the objective was to get all of the hosts in the host group Linux servers. So the filter will specify is Linux servers. We still need that authentication token. And if the authentication goes well, the method is executed. And the response we get is group ID is 2 for the name Linux servers. So now we know the group ID, which is what we need in the next call. Because in the next call, we want to get all of the hosts from the host group with group ID 2, where the tag location is present. So that's exactly what we do. We used a new method, host.get. We specify that we want to only get hosts from the host group ID 2. We now know that host group ID 2 is Linux servers. We also select our tags, extend them, and we specify that the tag location has to match on-prem. The response is that we get a single host with host ID 10,085, and we can use that information in the next API call, which is the host.update method, which is where we specify that we want to update the host with host ID 10,085, where the tag location has to match the value cloud. And that's exactly what it will do. It will show us which hosts are updated, and the host is now updated in the Zabbix environment. So that's just a simple example, of course. We use 3 different API calls to reach a result. And then the result will be whatever we thought of. So basically anything we want to do with this is within our limits. As long as you know how to code, as long as you know, which now you know how to use the API, you can build almost anything. So be creative, implement this in your own environments, go through that data, use those API calls to get the data or update the data, and start building some cool implementation. If you do not forget to upload your cool implementations to GitHub. We also upload to GitHub. So if you are ever looking for some cool API-based or not API-based implementations, you can find it over on our GitHub, open source ICT solutions. There's some cool Zabbix implementations right there. And there's just a bunch of cool implementations done by other people as well. For example, if I can find him. Yeah, this is also a cool implementation done using front-end modules and the API. So you might find BG-mod on Zabbix as well. There is a bunch of different ones. GitHub is full of them. Zabbix, their own share is full of them. You can Google them. You can find a lot of implementations. And of course, follow that default flow that we just went through. Make sure that you write out your flow and start building them. If you're using the user login method, do not forget to log out as well. Of course, you don't want to keep all of those sessions open to anyone, so make sure to log out. But if you're using Zabbix 5.4 or higher, so 6.0 LTS as well, make sure to use the API keys. All right. And then, of course, don't forget to leave any questions in the Q&A, but I'll also go through some Zabbix main course. So if you're ever looking to get more information, not only on the API, but on anything regarding Zabbix, you can always follow the Zabbix training courses over at oicts.com/training. You can do the Zabbix certified user one-day course if you're just trying to do the front end. Probably you're all in an API course. You want to do a little bit more than that. Check out the certified specialist 5-day course, which will tell you anything that you might need to know about Zabbix. We have the professional course, which is 3 days, all about even more extensive topics, like, for example, an entire day, almost an entire day about low-level discovery, and expert for those really Zabbix geeks that really want to know all about Zabbix, like, for example, us. Of course, there's also Zabbix support. Zabbix is 100% free, open source. You never have to pay for it. But if you're looking for somebody to back you up when something goes wrong, we have 24/7 support or 8x5 support available. We have different flavors with different options over at oicts.com/support. And of course, as we are a main or 100% Zabbix focused company, you might find that we can offer you technical support, consultancy, remote troubleshooting, template building, and a lot of other things like the trainings and support we just talked about. So check us out, oicts.com. You can find us in the Netherlands, the United States, and the United Kingdom, or basically anywhere in the world that you might want to get our help from. All right. If there's any more questions, I don't see anything in the Q&A right now, so I think everything should be clear then. Thank you all for attending. Nice having you here today. And I hope to see you all in the next webinar. Have a nice day.